like now to introduce our next speakers, Helena Morrissey and David Cruickshank. Helena is the CEO of Newton Investment Management. She joined Newton in 1995 and was appointed CEO in 2001, where she has led the firm for the past 11 years. Additionally, Helena spearheaded a cross-business initiative in the UK called the 30% Club, whose aim is to get 30% women on company boards by 2015. She was named the Financial News' most influential woman in European asset management in 2010. As if all this wasn't enough, she is also the mother of 9 children. Joining her in conversation is our only male speaker today, David Cruickshank, chairman of Deloitte since 2007. David has been a partner in the firm for the last 23 years and is a founder chairman of the 30% Club. He will be speaking with Helena about the role women play on boards and why this initiative has been so valuable for Deloitte. Please join me in welcoming Helena and David on the stage.
Well, good morning. I hope you're all recovering from the shock of the 9 children. I normally don't introduce that into the conversation too early on to avoid that sort of, silence that everybody, the sharp intake of breath. But I might have a few stories on that in a little while. But it gives me great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me back. It's so marvelous that your conference has grown, so you've gone off-site. And I'm delighted to be talking to David. I noticed that our title is Women Moving Business Forward, the subtitle after the inspiration bit. And of course noted that Sherry Blair and one of the questioners sort of raised the issue of the role of men in this whole issue about moving. I think Sherry said changing the world. Moving business forward might be part of changing the world, but the 30% Club is very much about women and men moving business forward. Let me just explain for 1 minute before I open the questions to David that the 30% Club, which was founded about only 16 months ago in November 2010, is a group of chairmen and organizations committed to achieving more women on their boards and senior levels, but not through a quota. The idea is it's very much something that should be business-led, but that is a conscious effort. One of the things that I realized right when at the beginning, going back to this point about women and men, was that a lot of women's initiatives, including the one that I was engaged in, Newton is owned by American company BNY Mellon, and I lead the Women's Development Network across the EMEA region, and have been doing so already for 5 years at that point. And I realized that although our events were open to all, what was happening is we weren't engaging the men, that question about how do you get men at the table. So part of the cunning plan behind the 30% Club was to reach out to chairmen who are invariably, not exclusively, but mostly men in this country, and ask for them to show their commitment and exert their influence and leadership to changing business culture. Approach David. He was one of the first 7 that were initially part of the group that when we launched in November 2010. We now have 37. And we had then, I think, just under 12% women on FTSE boards. Now it's 15.2. Obviously, we've had a lot happen since then, the Davis report and so forth. But I think that the leadership shown by the men is a very important part of how things have developed. Now, David, as well as being a founding member, he is also part of the Chairman's Advisory Council. We have a small group of chairmen who are really the sounding board for the women, who are the steering committee. And I consult with David and just 4 other chairmen quite regularly about things that we're doing for next steps. So you have obviously already played a big part in it so far, David. And I wanted to ask you, even though I sort of know the answer, but for the purpose of the audience, really on really what made you say right at the beginning, because my conversations have fell at that stage into 2, maybe 3 camps. There were really those who said, yes, I get it straight away and wanted to join up. And frankly, the only other sort was sort of saying, leave me alone and don't darken my door about this subject again. So we'll come back to the cultural point. But David, why did you say yes, and why is this important from your perspective as chairman of Deloitte in the UK?
Thank you, Helena. I'm very pleased to be here, slightly daunted, actually, with a room full of women. And actually, maybe I could relate that back to the starting point. When I trained in my firm, it was in our Edinburgh office, and to train as a chartered accountant, you have a 3-year training program. all the trainees for each of the 3 years were men. And at that point, there were no women partners in my firm at all. And the first woman partner became a partner in about 1984. And now we have about 15%. It's not enough. We'll come back to that later on. But so I've seen the journey, if you like, in our own firm with now a woman intake at graduate level. It's not quite half and half. It's about 45% women, 55% men. We have, at some stages, it has been about 50-50, but right now it's about 45-55. And our big challenge is to develop, nurture, and grow all that talent through our organization. Now, why is that important? Well, to me, it makes commercial sense because we want to have the best people in our firm. The best people don't come in male boxes or female boxes. They come in male and female. Our objective, very, very simply put, as an advisory firm, professional services advisory firm, is to have the best people and the best clients. At the very senior level, and why do I support the 30% club? We have on our executive about 25% of the composition of our executive are women, and on the board, which I chair, about 25% are women. So there's probably not the time for the confessional, Helena. We're not quite at 30% yet, but nearly there. Nearly there at 25. But at one point during the last few years, we were down to only one woman on our board, for reasons I won't bore you with. But the dynamics in the boardroom changed, and we didn't have the same richness in the conversations. We didn't have the same challenge. And I really noticed that when we then got back up again to having 4 women, as we have now, that there's a richness, a quality, a diversity of conversation, which gave us better results. So to me, this is all about getting the best answer, the best results. It's all commercial. It's yes, it means the working environment's nicer for everybody who comes in, for men and women, but the real answer is it's a commercial imperative.
And you mentioned, I mean, it's obviously fantastic, and this is not a stick-to-beat chairman who support the initiative up with if they haven't got 30% already. In fact, at 25, you're one of the furthest ahead. But you mentioned the 15% partners contrasting with the sort of 45 or 50% at the intake level. Is that a timing issue? Is it just because, you know, we've got a lag in terms of that even intake, or are there particular danger points that, you know, you're still struggling to overcome?
We spend, and this is the big question, we spend huge amounts of time analysing this every year, and I have to say I don't think we've got all the answers yet, and I don't think we've got it right yet. It's got better progressively. As I said, no women partners in 1984, 15% now. It's very different around the world. I'm talking today very much from a UK perspective, but if I take China, for example, it's not quite 50-50 women-men partners, but it's a much higher ratio than the UK. It's about 40-60, I think. But then contrast next door in Japan, and it's a smaller ratio than the UK. Similarly, South America, much smaller ratio than the UK. So it varies right around the world, but I'll just talk today from the UK experience because I can make it more personal that way. Yes, we start with about 45, 55. When we get up to senior manager level, which is somebody who's been in our firm for about 8 years or so, the proportion goes down to about 35% women, 65% men, and then it keeps thinning out as we go through. So there's a sort of pyramid there where we lose people all the way through. And the reasons for that are very complex. Some of it is due to people taking time off, having women not coming back. Is that our challenge? Is it the women's challenge? I think it's a big, big question for us. We think it's a huge amount our challenge to deal with it. We've developed lots of flexible working programs. We try to avoid having a presenteeism culture. It's quite hard sometimes in some bits of our business where people do work extremely long hours to service clients' needs. So we've tried to balance that and create a balance in the working environment. We've created a number of diversity networks around our firm, and in the UK we have about 12,000 people, and about 4,500 of them are members of diversity networks, and some of those are religious networks, some are minority ethnic networks. We have a working parents network, which is for men and women, and we have a women's network. And that's definitely helped in terms of people sharing information, best practice, giving us a forum to talk about flexibility so that people believe it. But on our scorecard, I would probably give us about 6 out of 10. We've still got a way to go.
Well, unfortunately, you're certainly not alone, of course. And I think, I mean, those of you who are familiar with the Davis report that came out this time last year, they specifically they had the pyramid, and they talked about the lost women, and they had, I think, 2,650-something responses to a questionnaire, part of the consultation, mainly from women. I think about 85% were from women. And they were trying to fathom out what is the, is there a particular pattern? And obviously we all know about a lot of women taking time off around childbearing years. But when they ask the questions, there's certainly part of the problem, as you are saying, is that there isn't one single answer. And it is a lot about the culture, though, isn't it? And that does take a time to change, doesn't it? And it's quite chicken and egg. One of the things that you're doing, because some of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of companies have tried very hard at different things, and some things work well and some things don't. Sherry Blair talked about mentoring. Do you do anything specifically around that?
We do, and I think that's, I mean, again, things that work, things that don't work. We have a lot of mentoring programs for men and women around the firm, and some are formal, which are necessary for people to progress in their careers, but some are much more informal, so that people have individuals who might sponsor them, not in a sort of commercial sense with brands, but sponsor them as in try and find opportunities for them, act as a sounding board for their career, be repository of wisdom when they are not quite sure what to do, or if they feel that the opportunities are going in the wrong direction for them, that sort of thing. So we're still, I would think, counselling, mentoring, well developed in our firm. Informal sponsorship, I would say 2/3 developed, but if there was an area for improvement, that would be a big area for us, I think. And I think particularly around senior women at those senior manager coming up to partner level, and then when people are partners, getting into the leadership of our firm, I think the sponsorship's absolutely key. We have a Women in Leadership network, which is comprised of our partners and partners who are on the board, partners who are on the executive. That's been very effective. But it's one of these challenges I don't think there's any one answer to or any one response to. You've just got to keep on doing new things and trying to move the bar, because we still lose, and it's again, I come back to this thing, it's still a real commercial issue. We lose too many talented people too early.
One of the things that the 30% Club, I think we've recognised since we started, and frankly it wasn't quite as ambitious as our, sort of the reality of the situation is now, is that a lot of these issues, it's a number of small things that together make for a big problem. And I guess in response to that, we're having this sort of concerted series of actions through the 30% initiative, and obviously a lot is around the pipeline that you've talked about, David. We're also very interested in some, innovative practices that people haven't, that have been experimented with and so forth. And I gather at Deloitte you've got something called the Directorship Academy, or the Non-Exec Directors Academy. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Because that's a very interesting sounding program.
Yeah, and I just want to refer back to Sherry Blair about men and women being different, and sometimes I think women and men not always understanding all those differences. So the classic Venus and Mars thing. One of the things that I observe, having counselled partners and women and men in our firm over many years, is that when a job promotion comes up and somebody's going for that role, if a woman knows about 60% of the issues involved in that role, she will focus on the 40% she doesn't know. If a man knows about the 60% of the issues, he will blag his way through the 40% and assume that he'll get by. I don't understand why that is. I've read about it a lot. I relate it back to counselling of men and women over the years. It's undoubtedly true, believe me. I've done millions and millions of not millions, an exaggeration, thousands of counselling sessions over many, many years, and it is true. I don't know why it's true. It's one of those Cherry Blair differences. We should just acknowledge it's there and try and deal with it. So what we've tried to do with the program at the Deloitte Academy, one of the reasons that many women think they can't go onto boards is because, well, we don't know. We don't know all the things we need to know to get on a board. A man, as I said, we'll get to find out enough and then blag the rest. So what we've set up this program to try and fill in those gaps, and it's targeted at executive women who aren't yet at board level. And we cover things like, what corporate governance looks like in the UK and globally, what an audit committee does, what a remuneration committee does, how to deal with headhunters to present your CV for the role, what boardroom dynamics are like, how to make an impression in the boardroom, how to react with the chairman, and all the softer stuff as well as the harder knowledge stuff. And we started this last summer. We've had 2 cohorts of women who've been through it so far, about 20 a time. We don't charge for it. It's one of these things. We use all the skills we as a firm have, and we borrow some friends like Helen and others to come along and talk about the areas that we can't cover, like dealing with investors, for example, which is Helena's area. And we put together programs. They've been very, very well attended, very well received. So we've had 2 cohorts so far. The third one starts in May, and I think we'll keep on running that because that seems to be well received. And somehow, we'll close that gap between the 60% and the 40%, the 40% that women don't know. I'm not sure we'll ever close it totally because I think that that's often in the eyes of the beholder. I think the women will probably never be totally sure they know enough, but I think hopefully we'll close a lot of the gap through the programme.
I have to share another type of anecdote that was, in a way, it's sort of tragic, really. I was speaking at another event a little while ago, and the speaker before me gave a story about how she was interviewing 2 candidates for a job. Basically, the job was an £80,000 job. There was a male candidate, and a female candidate, and they had to put out their salary expectations as part of the process. The male candidate wanted £100,000. And the female candidate said she was good for 60,000. So it does actually reflect your proportions thing. Anyway, the interviewer felt that the female was stronger, and she really felt a bit of a dilemma about the salary issue because she obviously didn't want this woman to undersell herself. And although she had a duty to her company not to sort of overpay, she also felt, this was going to be unfair if the woman didn't really realize that she'd set her expectations too low. So she said, and it was the speaker who was the interviewer, that she gave it in the clearest possible way. She said, she hinted, that you might want to rethink the salary with a clear view that she was encouraging her to reprice. You're very incredibly valuable. You've got such a wonderful experience. Is that you really sure that that's the price? Anyway, the woman said, well, she would think about it and came back, sort of, I'm not quite sure how, in what format, and came back and said, okay, she would do it for 50. So the woman said, what can you do? I mean, it's like, what can you do? And I have noticed myself, actually, just because sometimes people say, well, has everything like this ever happened to you? And I realized that I hadn't, over the years, ever shown at one stage, and this was after working for about 20 years, I hadn't ever made any overt requests in terms of money, ever. And then I remember my boss saying to me soon, just before bonus time, when bonus wasn't a dirty word, that, he was sort of, I was trying to read what he was trying to say, but I got it, that actually he was telling me that this individual called John was very money-oriented, and I suddenly realized, as I went through the conversation, I was thinking, I think he's telling me he's got a rather small budget for this, and he'd better give it to John, because John's the one that made it clear that money is very important to him. So I thought, okay, I've just got it now. I mean, what's there to lose? So I said, next time I saw him, I said, that conversation we're having, I said, I just want you to be clear that, I also care a bit about, being valued for my contribution. It was a very difficult thing, even though it sounds so innocuous. It was a difficult thing for me to say. And I was treated well that year. And I thought afterwards, I'd never spoken. I'd always thought I'd be looked after. I'd always thought that, one's contribution would be recognized. Idiotically, really, wasn't I? I mean, I was just about to suffer. So one of the messages today, hopefully you'll be inspired, but also you'll speak up for yourselves. Now, just on the academy, that is for people outside Deloitte's, yeah?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So one of the things that we struggle with, obviously, is coming back to this pipeline. One of the things that, in fact, gratifyingly, a lot of the chairmen that now I and this advisory group, such as David, when we're trying to recruit more chairmen, the conversation now is less, as it was sort of 2 years ago when we were starting the recruitment. Why is this important? I have to say that I think that penny has dropped, certainly with the FTSE and large professional firms like Deloitte's. More, it's like, well, how do I do it now? Because, where are these women that if I accept the arguments for the business case, where are the women? And this is going to be my only slightly Jeremy Paxman type challenging questions, although I don't think I do a very good impression of him, I have to admit, is that one of the things people say is that, accountants would be often very welcome on boards, but a lot of firms like Deloitte have a policy, as I understand it, because I think of the conflicts potentially of not allowing either men or women, obviously, to take on any non-exec directorships, which would broaden the pool. Can you elaborate a bit on why you've gone down that route rather than try to manage the conflicts?
Helena did tell me this would be a difficult question because it's the one she knows we score 0 out of 10 on. So it's I think if I can lean on a crutch that Cherry Blair provided earlier, actually, I think it's about choices. And in our firm, one of the things that we have to do, all the sorts of work we do, people hire us to do work because we're independent. And sometimes that independence is independence of thought, independence of mind. Sometimes it has to be avoiding conflicts by, for example, having people working in a company, or having a role in a company, which we're also advising, or indeed auditing, which would be against the rules. So one of the easy ways that we find to deal with that is by saying that all of our people can't take on commercial roles outside our firm, like being non-executive directors in companies. And it is a challenge because it's a choice we made. It's a choice people make when they work for us. They get great work. They have to work very hard. They get well rewarded. But we do limit what they can do. We do allow people to go on to charity boards, not-for-profit boards, those sorts of things, and in that way gain some experience of working outside our environment and getting experience. But we haven't yet, I'm afraid, worked out how to deal with this issue. And I know there is quite a push, actually, around for firms like ours to be a bit more exciting and less boring about this issue. And we'll have to try. We haven't found a way yet, Helena, but we are looking at it.
You don't score 0, because I think it's very encouraging on the charity and the not-for-profit, because I think that one of the things that can happen to broaden the whole pipeline issue is that there is a look across different sectors. I certainly see been a few sort of groundbreaking appointments over the last year, the most visible being Jasmine Whitbread, who's CEO of Save the Children International, has been appointed to the BT board, the British Telecom board, and I think a few years ago that probably would have been inconceivable, even though obviously running an international charity like Save the Children is a massive, big job, but there just wasn't that lateral thinking. So I think that's a start, David. We'll let you off that one. Now I do want to turn attention to sort of what your assessment, move away from Deloitte's a little bit, and talk about what's your assessment of the progress that we're making on boards specifically, but also then, on this whole promotion of women or development of women in senior positions a year on after the Davis report. There's a huge debate at the moment about, there's a lot of noise around it, but is the pace quick enough? What's your view?
I think if you look at the numbers, you could say, well, the pace can never be quick enough because it takes time. On the other hand, most of you will read the papers and follow news media and follow business media frequently, and the noise levels about this have increased dramatically over the last year. It's now a talking point in boards of directors where it wasn't before. Companies are having to disclose in their accounts what they're doing about it. Headhunters are much more active and being much more creative in looking for people who've got different skill sets to join boards. And I think there is a recognition amongst huge numbers of chairmen out there of boards of companies that actually the board will be better if it was more diverse. And by that I mean women, but also other aspects of diversity, but we might cover those another time. And so I think, and I don't think that's going to go away. I don't think the noise is going to go away. I think there's a momentum now, and I think a lot down to Helena's efforts with the 30% Club and leading that and putting her head above the parapet and taking a lead. It's something that I think many companies thought was important before because they wanted to provide role models within their own organizations for women coming in and looking up and seeing opportunity. But to be honest, the concerted efforts across sectors and companies was a bit patchy. This is now a real movement, actually, and I think it will come. It will be timing. It does force more creativity and more initiatives. There's a lot more discussion going on between companies about how to get executives more prepared for board roles. There's a lot more information, which the 30% Club does, and getting information from one company to another company. It provides forums for people to discuss things. So I think a huge amount of progress has been made in a year. whilst at the same time, I'd still have a view, we need to keep moving and kick ourselves because the pace is never fast enough.
Well, a couple of things I might add to that. That certainly the point about the search firms and the thoughtfulness now that I think both they and a lot of company chairmen are applying to the whole issue of what makes for an effective board. I asked a headhunter recently, I was asking, there's this voluntary code that 20 of the leading firms have devised following the Davis report and signed up to, which has such measures as at least 30% of a long list for boardroom candidates has to be a female. I've asked one recently, talk me through the process when someone comes to you and says they've got a vacancy, how do you go about it? Certainly in the past, I think, and they were the first to admit it, it would be a list of, frankly, the great and the good, people that we'd recognize probably and who were tried and tested, usually have boardroom experience. Now, apparently, according to this individual, she may have been just telling me what I wanted to hear, but she said it's more of a question of looking at who's already on the board, and not just their formal skills, are they auditors, are they lawyers, are they, they run a P&L before, but looking also at their sort of everything from their personality to what might call their intrinsic capabilities, how do they engage with other people. And I think this is very encouraging in terms of building a team at a board. We had an event, and it's now the other strand of what I wanted to emphasize, we had an event just this last week at the same time, an investor seminar for, we now have an investor subgroup at the 30% club. And there are 11 formal members of the investment group, and that group together, we have over £1.7 trillion under management. And we had an event last week, which 150 people attended, mainly from the investment management community. And obviously a lot of people have said to me, well, investors never bring this up in terms of, part of the meetings with companies. And I think that's going to change. I think that one of the things that came up last week, a gentleman, he's got as he put it last week, a girl's name, which is very helpful in terms of surprising everybody, Sasha Sedan, who's the corporate governance head at Legal & General Investment Management. Now, this group has nearly £400 billion under management, and they're mainly passive investors. And so they have to own 4% of every FTSE company and every one of the 250 below. And so they've got, all they're interested in is floating all the boats. They want to have bigger shareholder return for all companies. He described himself as chief nagger on the issue these days, but he goes to companies and he persists. He says, we'll always have to own 4%. It's not like Newton, which can buy and sell companies. And they might have to own more if they go up in terms of assets under management. But he asked them, and he will vote against the, chairmen are up for re-election annually, and they will either abstain in the first year or then vote against the re-election of chairmen who haven't done enough on diversity generally in the boardroom. I think there's going to be another leg of arguments over the next week, at least, about quotas. And I suppose I know this is always a bit of an issue. I'm interested, can I just ask, first of all, for a show of hands in terms of who is in favor of applying quotas, mandated quotas, to get more women in senior levels, including the boardroom? Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay, I think that's definitely the minority, isn't it? But a significant minority. Now, I'm passionately against, and that may be because I wouldn't want to serve a board knowing that I was part of a quota. And I do personally feel that the pace of change is speeding up and will quicken. But apparently, then as soon as Monday, there's going to be another proposal from the EU to legislate for quotas. And they're talking about 40%, albeit with a longer lead time. David, what's your personal view? And you don't have to say this as a 30% club chairman. You can just say it as I won't hold it against you if you now declare that you're pro-quotas.
Targets and quotas are different things. And I think quotas are mandated by regulation or by law. And I agree with you, Helen. I think for people to be on a board because they were there to comply with the legal requirement and nothing else, and I'm not saying that would be the case, but in extremis it could be the case, I think it devalues the contribution of that individual and devalues that individual. So I think in the absence of anything else happening, sometimes you have to have, in other walks of life, you have to have quotas. But I think with the change that's taken place in the UK over the last year, 18 months. We are on a very, very fast journey at the moment. As I said earlier, this is now a subject that's being talked about in every big boardroom in the country. It's talked about in many other OECD countries as well, not just the UK. And I think it's too soon for anybody to make a judgment on how that movement is going when, really the movement has only been joined up in a sort of collective way over the last 18 months. I would say if, for example, in 5 years' time, there hadn't been progress in moving the needle, with significant percentage increases every year, then I would say, let's revisit it if we failed on all other initiatives. But I think I'd much rather see us get there with people being chosen because of their skills and their contribution they can make, and not because of having to tick some box to comply with the regulation.
Well, certainly as an investor, because this for me is, although I care passionately about equality, I'm not doing this out of, a particular social justice motivation. I'm doing it because I think it's better for business. And from an investment point of view, there is actually evidence that quotas can destroy shareholder value, particularly if you look at the Norwegian experience, which might be a bit unfair because they pushed them through so quickly. But I think it's certainly questionable in terms of whether it would be additive to business culture. I met Kay Swinburne, Dr. Kay Swinburne, who's MEP, this last week as well on the subject. She had asked to see me. I was interested in the work 30% Club was doing. And so I, as everyone does these days, I Googled her the night before. I'd sort of seen her face and various things. And she's involved with a lot of quite dry regulation. I listened to quite a few boring interviews she'd given, and I noticed that when it says, how many people who watch these YouTube videos, it was like 3, So I made it 4. So she was involved with a lot of very worthy but quite sort of detailed things around MiFID and so forth. But I thought, well, there's nothing about, why she asked to see me, because there's nothing about her interest in women and so forth. So I typed in, Dr. Kay Swinburne and quotas, and it came up with all this campaign she'd done about fishing quotas. So I thought, there's this line that quotas are for fish, not for women, which I thought was fairly apt in that. Now, I suspect there might be some views in the audience on that and other things we've discussed. And I was told to sort of that we should speak for about half the time and then throw it open to questions. So like to do that about any of the topics we've discussed or things we haven't.
Goodness, hands have gone up quickly. Lots of hands.
Yeah, lots of hands. How are we going to do this?
Hi, thank you. That's really interesting. I'm Carmen Marrero. I run my own business. The question I have about the quota thing is an interesting one, of course, and I didn't raise my hand either way. Wouldn't you say that the fact that this issue is raised in the boardrooms as much, and obviously the last 2 years, and you definitely see it in the Financial Times every other day and stuff like that, is to do with the fact that people like Lord Davies threatened to impose quotas?
Well, it's funny, because some people have suggested, well, you need to keep that threat to galvanize any action. I actually think that the few, and I have to call them the sort of in the dinosaur camp still, that remain. I mean, it's not that every chairman is as enlightened as David is, but the few that are, I think they are completely oblivious to the threat of quotas. I mean, I've actually got an opinion piece in The Independent today. Please read it. If you agree with it, retweet it, because I realise that's all how these things spread. Plug there for that. But this is ahead of the Monday sort of announcement. And the original version, which was a bit longer, I think they might have put that one on the internet, had a bit of a call to action at the end, because I think we're in the last chance saloon, really. If the EU imposes this, then I think we can still keep going with voluntary initiatives. But it does amaze me. I think a lot of things coming out from the EU in particular, a lot of British businessmen have no idea that that's where policy is set and that's where rules and regulations are set until it's actually there. On this and other issues, I mean, the whole thing on compensation that was a big topic the last couple of years in various EU attempts of legislation and so forth, and no one seemed to recognize it was there until the FSA was trying to interpret it. So I'm not quite sure. I think there are those who just buried their head in the sand. They're not engaging on the subject, and even if the quota, it would be the day it's imposed that they would wake up. So I'm not so sure. I think at the moment what they're having is some discussion from enlightened chairmen about why aren't you doing this. I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, I'd still rather, and you may be right, I think for certain boards, for certain people, you may be right. I think it's much more productive to advance this debate on the commercial benefits in the boardroom of having a diverse board and the better answers and better debate and better quality decision making that ensues from that. And that's where I'd really like the whole debate to be. And but there has to be action, and there has to be results as a result of that. So it's no good talking about it, things have to happen.
To leave the microphone.
Thank you. My name's Kate Grusing. I run a search firm called Sapphire Partners. There was a fascinating article in the FT about a week ago by Andrew Hill, an editor, where he talked about all of this debate on quotas is a bit of a red herring and missing the point. And what we need to be focusing on is women in the pipeline. And my guess is, looking around this room, most of the women in this room are a good 20 years away from being in a board position. I'm interested in your feedback for how the focus on women in boardrooms and the 30% Club can translate through for the women here at the building stages of their career. Because I'm hugely confident we'll get the women in the boardrooms. The pipeline is absolutely out there. But I think the points you shared about how to keep them in the organizations and get them in the executive roles, I think that's really where the impact is.
Should I start? Well, I definitely agree, Kate, and one of the reasons why I'm here today, and I realize some people are at the beginning of their career journey, as Sherry put it, or some a bit further along, is because I firmly believe that women should be aware of the issue and thoughtful, mindful of what might lie ahead. I mean, Sherry mentioned obviously being completely shocked when she graduated top of the bar that she couldn't get, chambers pupillage, which obviously seems completely wrong today. But I think that, I certainly, when I started my career about 25 years ago, also was shocked when, I thought it was plain sailing, and that also I hadn't thought through, having a family. I never had thought through having 9 children. That was obviously never came about, but I went into it unconsciously, and I speak at sixth form schools as well to girls there, because I think that if we can encourage people, Sherry mentioned about not it being a binary decision. I'm hopeful that the next 10 years we'll see an evolution from the business culture today of this sort of much more, formalized way of working, partly because of technology, not just because of this discussion about diversity, to be more fluid and open. But I think if you're starting your career, you need to be mindful that there are things you need to do along the way, and that things that might happen to you that if you don't preconceive them, might cause you never to get to develop your skills and be in the boardroom. So it's a bit nebulous point, but I think that having that sort of active thought process that yes, one day I may want to have children, and therefore the career choice for a start is an important one to make. How whether your partner would be supportive of that. It's all part of the thought process that I think can help.
I'd just like to, I agree with all that. I'd maybe just like to make one comment, and that is you should all believe it's absolutely possible. And I think if we're talking about previous generations in a room like this, maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I remember my wife went for a job interview, and she did much better at university than I did. And it was a bit like the Cherry Blair story, actually. I sort of started to get serious about my career when I started training as an accountant. But at university, I did what I needed to do to get my exams. And my wife was much more diligent than I was. And she went for a role I won't embarrass her by naming them, but a government department, and a prestigious civil service role in 1979, when we both graduated. And she was told at the interview, we don't think it's a 5-6 year training program. We don't think it's going to be worth investing in you because we don't think you're going to stay around. We think you're going to go off and have children, quote unquote, was said to her. And she went to a commercial organisation ultimately. That will never happen for you now. And it might seem, 1979 might seem like eons away for you. Huge light years away. But all of you should believe it's possible that you can get into a boardroom of companies right around the world. And I think the timing of that, just to give you an idea, the women who are on the Deloitte Academy program that we're running at the moment, filling in the gap of the 40% bit, they'll try, if it's there, but filling it in. I would say the average ages there are between 30 and 42, 43, that sort of age, actually. So I wouldn't like to stipulate an age, but I think when people have got a good quotient of experience around a number of areas, you know, that they're ready to do the job. You don't need to wait until you're, you know, sort of in your 50s to get into a boardroom, but you do have to take a little bit of care, just emphasising Helena's point, to sort of plan your career and think about, you know, believing it's possible, and then just think about what you'd like to do to build your career to get to that point.
Hi there, my name's Kirsten. I have a two-part question, a part for each of you. I'm very interested to understand, when you founded the 30% Club and you started looking for chairman to be part of that, what was your sales pitch? How did you, I imagine you may had to convince some of them. And the question for you, David, is you obviously understand the merits of the 30% Club and you're very bought into the progression of women in your company. How do you spread that word down to your other leadership? So I've taken a very long time to ask that question.
Well, I did the classic thing of, you know, using your network, and in fact, the idea had sort of come about a bit on a whim, having recognised that not just my organisation, but just about every other one that I spoke to was sort of stuck at around the 10% level of senior women. I'd invited a group of actually all women to discuss was there anything we could collectively do, realising it wasn't just us. That was for a Monday lunchtime, and on the Friday, sort of slightly on a whim, I'd been reading a piece of research, a couple of pieces of research, one by McKinsey, and I think a lady is going to be on the panel next, but also there was a call for quota. A German company, Deutsche Telekom, had implied 30% quota, and though I'm not pro-quotas, thought actually that's what we need a target, and we also need to have the chairman involved. And so I threw open the idea by email to the people coming, and by Monday lunchtime when we met, because I was really determined not to have another talking shop about the issue, they said, yeah, they thought it was a great idea. And then we said, well, let's try it out. So we did actually that day approach to the chairman who we knew best, basically. And then the first 7 really were the chairman of the companies that those women were there with it. And it wasn't all that were able to get 14 at the lunch, and we started off with 7 founding chairmen. So we literally, you know, tried out the idea, because it seemed to us to make sense, by asking friendly chairmen. First of all, I've learned a lot along the way about protocol, and I did make a lot of mistakes. I did discover, actually, someone told me that they'd had a conversation in the lift with a chairman, and that he was very upset that he hadn't been invited to be a member. So I thought, well, it didn't occur to me to go around asking everybody. I thought I wouldn't necessarily be the person to ask them. So I wrote some letters then. I started at A in the alphabet by company name, and I got, I thought it was a very innocuous letter, really. And anyway, I must admit, I got equivalent of hate mail from quite a few. Which was a kind of like, I was thinking, I wasn't asking for, and they didn't read the letter either, because I would start, the first paragraph would say, or the second, this is not a call for a quota, and they're right back saying, totally anti-quotas, don't want to join. So I think, oh, well, so I got down to H. I got to Hanson, actually. I got to HA, and decided that this wasn't the way to recruit, and that's why we have our wonderful chairman advisory group who contact your friends and other people that you think might be either receptive or convincible.
Yeah, and I think just to answer the question about within organisations, I think it does require a tone from the top, actually, to make sure that everybody is bought in to the agenda. And in our organisation, it's not been too hard, because we are a people business. We have huge numbers of young people, and I think all of the people who lead the business help recruit those people, work with them day to day, so they see where the talent is, and so they understand the dynamics. But there's always 1 or 2 backwoodsmen that you need to sort of beat up every now and then. But it does require a clear vision from the top, and clear articulation of policies, and then most other people in the organisation follow through.
Hi, I'm Marianne Trigliccia from Barclays. Apologies, David. My questions are to Helena. My first question is, I'm sure everyone is very curious to know, how did you build such a stellar career and have 9 children? And question number 2 is, what we can do at this stage of our career early on helping other women and also getting help from the woman from the top. Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to ignore my own advice that I gave you a few minutes ago in terms of planning things, because I didn't plan any of it, really. But perhaps a slightly different era. I certainly didn't expect to have certainly so many children. Now, how do I go about this question? I think, to be honest, the main thing for me, and it's actually contrary to what most people do now, is I had my first child when I was quite young. He's going to be 21 this year, and I was 24 when I became pregnant with him. And that immediately, it obviously propelled me into another age cohort, really. Most of the professional women in the city having children were at least 10 years older than me. And I wasn't, I certainly wasn't financially secure. Mortgage rates, I think, were 15% at the time. There was negative equity in our house or flat that we had. We couldn't afford a nanny, and it was all kind of a bit painful, to be honest. And then my husband was made redundant. But with hindsight, that's not supposed to be a massive sob story, but I have to explain the background to the... But with hindsight, that really tortuous first year when I went back to work, and not particularly through choice, but because I had to, and I really was, I don't want to use a cliche about character building, but it really did. It was a school of hard knocks a bit. That year, or 18 months really, was quite tortuous, and I was always getting calls from the nursery that was out in the city saying he was sick, and I had to collect him. It was just like I felt torn all over the place. But it really, really hardened my resolve, having overcome quite a difficult period, I think, to carry on when I then went and had subsequent children. And also, frankly, I wasn't really, sounds funny, perhaps say it, set in my ways. I think as a young couple, you can kind of adapt quite easily, whereas I know a lot of my friends have had their babies sort of late 30s, early 40s, and I would say this, it's quite hard. They are financially secure, and they have more choices, but I can see as well that they struggle slightly to adjust and sometimes feel a bit worn out by work and then sort of want to down tools immediately, and enjoy that. Having lots of children, obviously, as I said to my boss once when I told him that I was pregnant with the 7th, I think it was, he said, he looked a bit sort of horrified, and I said, which was a reasonable reaction, I had to say. But I said to him, no, but I'm not going from sort of like 0 to 7. I said, it's just like 1. And he said, yeah, actually, that's only like a 16.3% increase. And I said, put it that way, and it's really nothing, is it? It's going to it was a funny reaction. He was sort of like going, I don't know if we can deal with this. And then it was, so I suppose the family's evolved. And just as Sherry said as well, children don't stay young in that zone for a very long time. And I've been very lucky. I think when I was main CEO of Newton, which was a little bit of an unforeseen development on my part, but a different story about that. I had 5 children then, and the youngest were just turned 3, just turned 2, just turned 1. I had 3 in 2 years, effectively, and that was very, very tough. And so I look upon those sort of moments of difficulty, and although I didn't particularly enjoy them at the time, that was the best experience for me in terms of actually feeling I could do more and I can overcome things. And I think has hardened my resolve when I've had knocks in the 30% club, because it hasn't been plain sailing, even though a lot seems to have been achieved a long time. I think now, if I just say the last thing, is that I feel that I do want to get out there and hopefully in some way inspire people to think women to think you can do both a career and have family. And I hope also help other women. I want to say that importantly, because I do get frustrated, and I won't name them obviously, that there are some very senior women, particularly in this, not just in this country, but in America as well, who don't do anything for other women and seem to approach the whole subject for, well, no one helped me, which, going back to Sherry's experience of her life being much easier than her mother's, and I, look to in my case, my 2 grandmothers were both very strong women, very clever women, neither of them went to university, and I think we should help the next generation. So sorry that I went off piste a bit there, but wanted to say those things. 2 at the back, 3 at the back.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Laura Taylor. I work for a strategy consulting firm. This might be a little bit of a controversial question, but it feels like the target of 30 to 40% women on boards needs to be a long-term initiative, given the pyramid in the workforce that we talked about. What do you think can be done to change the culture in professional services firms to encourage women to stay in the workforce longer, particularly after having children? In my experience, I worked for an investment bank for 3.5 years and moved to consulting for a better lifestyle, and I still see very few senior...
Was it Deloitte?
I still see very few senior women and very few senior women who've managed to have children and sort of done it successfully. So how can we change the way our businesses are now so it's better in 10 years' time, 15 years' time?
I will just deal the question in two parts. The pipeline bit, I chaired the opening sessions of the two Deloitte Academy programs that I mentioned earlier that we've been running. And I sat at the introductions that everybody did of themselves at the first session with a chairman from one of our big corporate clients speaking that morning, and he was talking about corporate boardrooms. And all the women around the table who didn't have non-executive director roles currently, but wanted to have, gave descriptions of what they did and their experience and their CVs, basically for each other. And as they were going round the table, I thought, my goodness, wow, there's real richness in this room. There's so much experience. And the quality of some of the work that the people were doing and the experience it had was just phenomenal. And I was so pleased that when the chairman of the corporate client of ours spoke first, he said, you know, I'm trying to shake up my board at the moment. He said, I think there's probably about 7 or 8 of you who would be better than most of my non-executives at the moment. Now, obviously, I won't name him or the board he was talking about. But I really do believe there is the pipeline there. I think, and I don't believe the bit for some people who say that there isn't a pipeline. There is a pipeline. It's just not always obvious because the people don't always go shouting from the rooftop saying, I'm great. That, as I was saying earlier, that's not a characteristic that most women have anyway. But I think it does require a bit more work to dig beneath the surface to lift up some people who are there. So I think there is a pipeline. I think people can increase the numbers of women on boards with the talent that's already there. They just need to work a little bit hard to find it because it's not always people who've been on lots of boards already. As the second question, yeah, tough question. I mean, what can I say? There are conflicts in firms like ours between the need to serve as clients and meet deadlines, which does involve sometimes huge working hours, huge efforts, unsocial calls on time. And we struggle with that on the one hand to satisfy clients and make sure that they get all they want, and at the same time make sure that we have more balance for the working lives of all our people, actually women and men. It's not easy, and I think the best we can do is make sure that at critical junctures in people's careers, we acknowledge that there is change. And as Cherry Blair was saying earlier, I think she put it rather nicely, the balance changes. So when women are going to have children, when we have provision for people who have got responsibilities for elderly relatives as well, when there are critical points in people's careers where they need to focus elsewhere, we've got to try and create more flexibility to ensure they can have that focus, whilst at the same time making it good for them coming back. So that's a lot about keeping the connections going when people are away on maternity leave or when they're away looking after aged parents. It's about the culture of making sure that actually people don't feel they've lost out and aren't looked down upon because they've been out of the market for 6 months or 9 months. But yeah, it is a challenge, and it's something we constantly grapple with. And I'd say most consulting firms, I think, have got better at it, but I don't think anybody in my position, any of the other firms, would say they've got there yet. I think it's something that we're still working at and experimenting with different techniques to get better. Well, that caused more hands to go up.
Yeah. Which bit didn't they like of what you just said there?
Thank you. My name is Sophia Brown. I'm from Diageo. I wanted to pick up on a couple of points that both of you made. You said at the front end of what you spoke about, David, that we're going to focus on the UK, get that. But you also mentioned that in China there's a better ratio of male to female partners. I just wanted to understand why that is the case, what you think has driven that. And also to pick up on the point, Helena, that you made around the intrinsic qualities. You know, when you spoke about I wanted to understand what came out of that. What did that mean? Yeah, thank you.
I mean, China fascinates me for all sorts of reasons, and probably most of you in this room as well, and maybe some people here from China. But it just strikes me, and again, I'm an outsider, so I only know what I know from talking to people and being there occasionally and reading and Chinese partners. But it doesn't appear that there's any of the legacy baggage that we've had in the UK or other countries in Western Europe have had. About what's expected of women, what's expected of men in the workplace. It just seems that there's an expectation that women and men will do the same sorts of things. And that, we benefited from that. And so we have some phenomenally able people in our practice in China, both men and women, and it's seen as as a great profession to go into. But it's interesting because it's a younger profession than in the UK. I mean, we have about the same number of people in China in our firm now there as we have in the UK, but it's been a very steep growth. But it's just turned out that we managed to keep and develop more women through departments. I think it's a lot to do with the culture. I'm sure we've got a lot of things right as well for my Chinese partners, if any of them ever want to hear this, but I'm sure I think a lot of it's cultural.
And on the intrinsic capabilities, recently I interviewed Sir Philip Hampton, chairman of the RBS board, and explored with him. Obviously, he acquired a situation where the board obviously had been criticised, or has since been criticised by the FSA for its part that they played in the failure of RBS, and he basically reconstituted the board. And I asked him to elaborate really on how he'd done that and what he was looking for. And the interview is actually on the 30% Club website if you're interested. But he basically went through. I mean, he started with the very basic point. He said, what I didn't want was 12 CEOs. I didn't want the egos that goes with sort of 12 CEOs. I didn't want 12 people with lots and lots of board experience who had a very fixed set of views in their mind about how it would work. He wanted people who would work together as a team, and he wanted a diverse range of perspectives. And when it came to intrinsic capabilities, what he was meaning, and what I think a lot of people mean, is a lot around personality and how people engage. It's not something that you could pick up from a written CV, but is that person extrovert? Is that person afraid to challenge, or that's the nature of their being? A lot of the experience that somebody might have outside the workplace as well that has built them into the person who they are, and that can be including family responsibilities and charity work and so forth, which is where it comes back. But it's much more, it's less about the qualifications on paper and more what is the role that person is going to play as a person on the board.
I think we have time for one more question.
Goodness.
Hi, my name's Zoe and I work for arts charity. And generally in that sector, there tends to be more women in more senior roles. And I've had quite often senior managers who have gone on maternity leave and then come back and had part-time hours, and that's great, and I approve of flexible working. But as someone who's needed that person and they're just not there, I wondered if you had anything to say about what support you give to the staff of people who are left waiting for the person to come back, and then when they come back don't have the support.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it is much easier in a bigger organisation where you've got bigger pools of people to deal with, and you can move people around, and somebody being not there for 6 months, a good career opportunity for somebody else, and then we can shuffle the pack all the time. I do appreciate that. Especially for micro businesses and then some smaller charities, it is tough if a key person goes. And I think that's where the benefits of the networks and comparing notes of what other people have done in those situations and how they've managed it and so on, I think it kicks in, because it's not easy. It'd be wrong to say it's easy for smaller businesses to be as flexible. It's not always.
No, I suppose I'd just add, I think that, I think it's a very valid point, and I think that companies ideally shouldn't just take away somebody for part of the time, and there needs to be a sort of change in the way that the work is done. Perhaps that person is irreplaceable, though, in terms of their input. But certainly at Newton, and it was actually about 10 years ago when markets were weak and Newton was in a quite difficult period. It was soon after we'd been acquired, and a lot of clients were sort of skeptical. I introduced, rather than make people redundant, because we were under some financial pressures, I asked for volunteers for a 4-day week, just for 6 months, going back to your point about sort of the stigma that might be attached if someone's sort of not working full time. And I was surprised that as many men as women came forward for that. And during that period, although to this day, some of those, mostly men, actually stayed on the 4-day week. Obviously, they took a drop in salary as a result. But the interesting thing to me was how the way that the rest of the team, and Newton runs it, we are bigger than your company, sounds like it is, and we were able to, that everybody had to obviously adapt and flex. It couldn't be just that you took that piece away for a day a week and then everything carried on. And I guess that's one thing that I think it's, to echo David's point, it's a challenge for small businesses. I do think that technology is a bit of an enabler in all of this. Perhaps your people are literally out of sight, out of mind, can't be contacted. But certainly for many professions, I think that that has enabled it to work and not be such a crisis when there is a gap. And I do think technology is a big enabler for more flexibility and a different type of working culture than we've been used to. But it's not there's no easy answer to if someone key is missing.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but I'd like to thank Helena and David for their time and for taking all our questions.